Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're diving into a truth that most people spend years trying to understand, and even longer trying to practice. The most powerful response is no response. At first, that idea sounds passive. It sounds weak. After all, we're taught that strength means defending ourselves, proving our point, correcting misunderstandings, and making sure people know our side of the story. But what if the need to respond is actually where your power leaks away? What if every unnecessary explanation, every emotional reaction, every attempt to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you is quietly draining your energy, your peace, and your influence? The truth is that not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every insult deserves a comeback. Not every conflict deserves your participation. And yet, most people spend their lives trapped in an invisible psychological prison. They react to every criticism, every provocation, every judgment, as if their survival depends on it. Why? Because silence is uncomfortable. Silence forces us to confront a terrifying possibility that we cannot control what other people think of us. Carl Jung once suggested that what disturbs us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people never reach that understanding because they're too busy reacting, too busy fighting every battle, too busy proving their worth to audiences that have already made up their minds. The strongest individuals eventually discover something different. They realize that power is not found in having the last word. Power is found in not needing it. In today's episode, we'll explore the hidden psychology behind silence, why emotionally mature people often say less, how manipulative individuals depend on your reactions, and why your refusal to engage can become the most powerful statement you'll ever make. Because sometimes the moment you stop responding is the moment you stop being controlled. Before we can understand why silence is powerful, we must first understand why reacting feels so natural. Most people assume that their reactions are conscious choices. They believe they carefully decide how to respond when someone criticizes them, disrespects them, or challenges their beliefs. But psychology suggests something different. In many situations, the reaction happens long before conscious thought arrives. Think about the last time someone said something that offended you. Perhaps they questioned your intelligence, criticized your decisions, or accused you of something that wasn't true. What happened inside you? Chances are you felt a sudden emotional surge. Your heart rate increased. Your mind immediately began searching for arguments, explanations, and defenses. That response wasn't random. Human beings are biologically wired to react to perceived threats. Thousands of years ago, survival depended on quickly identifying danger and responding immediately. The problem is that our brains often treat social threats the same way they treat physical threats. A harsh comment can trigger a response similar to a physical attack. A public embarrassment can activate the same fear systems that once protected our ancestors from exclusion from the tribe. This is why criticism feels so powerful. The brain doesn't always distinguish between a threat to your body and a threat to your identity. When someone challenges the image you have of yourself, the ego becomes defensive. It feels compelled to restore balance. It wants to prove that the criticism is wrong. It wants to explain, justify, and defend. This is where many people become trapped. They spend enormous amounts of energy responding to every negative opinion, every misunderstanding, and every judgment. They believe that if they can just explain themselves clearly enough, everyone will finally understand. But life rarely works that way. Many reactions are not attempts to communicate. They are attempts to regain emotional control. The irony is that the more desperately you react, the less control you actually have. Imagine someone insults you and your entire mood changes. You spend hours replaying the conversation in your head. You think about what you should have said. You imagine future arguments. You carry that emotional burden throughout the day. Who is controlling your emotional state in that moment? You or them? This is a question most people avoid because the answer is uncomfortable. The truth is that whenever another person's words can instantly dictate your emotions, they gain a certain degree of influence over your inner world. Emotionally mature individuals eventually recognize this pattern. They realize that reacting is often automatic, while restraint is intentional. Anyone can lose control. Anyone can argue. Anyone can defend themselves endlessly. But remaining calm when your ego wants to fight back requires a different level of awareness. It requires understanding that not every criticism is a crisis, not every disagreement is a threat, and not every attack deserves your attention. The psychological need to react comes from a desire to protect the self. But true strength emerges when you realize that your identity is not as fragile as your emotions sometimes make it seem. Because the moment you stop reacting automatically, you begin reclaiming something incredibly valuable, your freedom. And that is where the real power of silence begins. There is a hidden habit that quietly controls the lives of countless people, yet very few ever recognize it. It doesn't look like an addiction. There are no obvious warning signs. Society even rewards it. But it drains confidence, steals peace of mind, and keeps people emotionally dependent on the opinions of others. That habit is the constant need to explain yourself. Most people don't realize how often they do it. They explain their decisions. They explain their boundaries. They explain their absence. They explain their feelings. They explain their intentions. And while communication is important, there comes a point where explanation stops being healthy communication and starts becoming a search for validation. Think about how often you've replayed conversations in your mind after someone misunderstood you. Maybe you wished you had used different words. Maybe you imagined sitting them down and finally making them see your perspective. Maybe you convinced yourself that if you could just explain things one more time, they would understand. But what if understanding was never the problem? One of the most painful lessons in life is realizing that some people don't misunderstand you because you communicated poorly. They misunderstand you because they are committed to seeing you through a particular lens. They have already formed a conclusion, and every explanation you offer simply gets filtered through that conclusion. This can be incredibly frustrating because human beings naturally crave understanding. We want others to see our intentions. We want fairness. We want people to recognize who we truly are. But the reality is that no matter how honest, clear, or sincere you are, you cannot control how another person interprets you. And that is where suffering begins. Many people spend years fighting battles that cannot be won. They exhaust themselves trying to correct every false assumption, defend every decision, and clarify every misunderstanding. They carry the weight of other people's perceptions as though it were their responsibility to manage them. It isn't. The truth is that your peace disappears the moment your self-worth becomes dependent on being understood by everyone around you. Psychologically speaking, the need to constantly explain yourself often comes from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of appearing selfish, rude, or unkind. Deep down, many people worry that if they don't explain themselves thoroughly enough, others will think badly of them. So they over-explain. They justify their choices. They seek permission for decisions that should require none. And without realizing it, they hand over their emotional authority. Confident people operate differently. They understand that explanations are tools, not obligations. They communicate when communication serves a purpose, but they don't feel compelled to defend every aspect of their existence. They recognize a simple truth. Not everyone deserves access to their reasoning. Not everyone deserves an explanation, and not everyone is genuinely interested in understanding. There comes a moment in personal growth when you realize that endlessly explaining yourself is not a sign of strength. It is often a sign that you are still seeking approval from people who may never give it. True freedom begins when you accept that some people will misunderstand you, some people will judge you unfairly, and some people will create stories about you that have nothing to do with reality. And that's okay, because your responsibility is not to control every perception. Your responsibility is to live in alignment with your values, The moment you stop chasing universal understanding, something remarkable happens. Your words become more intentional. Your mind becomes quieter. Your confidence becomes less dependent on external validation. And perhaps most importantly, you stop wasting energy trying to convince people who had already decided not to listen. That is when explanation transforms into wisdom. And wisdom knows when silence says enough. One of the most important psychological truths you can learn is that some people are not interested in understanding you. They are interested in controlling you. And control becomes much easier when they can control your emotions. This is why certain individuals seem to know exactly what to say to get a reaction out of you. They know which buttons to push, which insecurities to target, and which topics instantly trigger frustration, guilt, anger, or self-doubt. It may seem accidental, but often it isn't. Human behavior is driven by reinforcement. When people receive a reward for a certain behavior, they tend to repeat it. Manipulative individuals understand this, whether consciously or unconsciously. If provoking you consistently gets them attention, explanations, emotional reactions, or access to your mental energy, they learn that the strategy works. Your reaction becomes their reward. Think about someone who constantly criticizes others. Have you ever noticed that they rarely seem satisfied with any explanation? No matter how reasonable your response is, they find another issue, another accusation, another complaint. That's because the goal was never resolution. The goal was engagement. The goal was keeping you emotionally invested. Many toxic dynamics survive because one person keeps reacting while the other keeps provoking. It's a cycle that feeds itself. One person creates emotional chaos, and the other spends endless energy trying to restore peace. But peace never arrives, because chaos was the point. This is why emotionally manipulative people often become frustrated when you remain calm. They expect resistance. They expect arguments. They expect emotional outbursts. What they don't expect is emotional neutrality. Silence disrupts the pattern. When someone throws bait into the water and nothing bites, the game suddenly becomes much less enjoyable. Psychologists often talk about emotional regulation as a sign of maturity, but there is another benefit that people rarely discuss. Emotional regulation makes you difficult to manipulate. When you no longer react automatically, people lose access to one of their most powerful tools: your emotions. This doesn't mean becoming cold or detached from life. It doesn't mean suppressing your feelings or pretending you don't care. It means recognizing that not every emotional invitation deserves acceptance. Imagine someone insults you in hopes of provoking an argument. The average person immediately feels compelled to defend themselves. They explain, justify, argue, and attempt to prove their worth. But what happens when you don't participate? What happens when you refuse to step into the arena? Suddenly, the person trying to provoke you is left standing alone. And that's where a fascinating psychological shift occurs. Many manipulative people derive their sense of power from controlling the emotional states of others. When they can make someone angry, defensive, anxious, or guilty, they feel influential. They feel significant. But when their attempts fail, they are forced to confront something uncomfortable. Their power was never as strong as they believed. This is why silence can be so unsettling. It removes the fuel from the fire. It denies manipulators the emotional response they were seeking. It communicates confidence without a single word. The strongest people understand that every reaction comes with a cost. Every argument consumes energy. Every unnecessary conflict steals attention from things that actually matter. And eventually they realize something life-changing. Not every battle is meant to be won. Some battles are meant to be abandoned. Because the moment you stop feeding manipulation with your reactions, you reclaim ownership of your mind. And that is a level of freedom that no manipulator can tolerate and no argument can provide. Most people misunderstand what power actually looks like. They imagine power as dominance. They picture someone commanding attention, speaking loudly, winning arguments, and always having the perfect response. Society often celebrates those who can overpower others with words, status, or influence. But if you observe truly powerful individuals closely, you'll notice something surprising. They often speak less, they react less, and they rarely feel the need to prove themselves. This is because genuine power is not about controlling other people. It is about controlling yourself. Anyone can react when they are angry. Anyone can raise their voice when they feel disrespected. Anyone can become defensive when their ego is threatened. These behaviors require very little discipline. They happen automatically. They are emotional reflexes, not demonstrations of strength. Self-control, however, is different. Self-control requires awareness. It requires the ability to experience powerful emotions without becoming a prisoner of them. Imagine two people facing the exact same insult. The first person immediately becomes angry. They argue, defend themselves, and spend the rest of the day thinking about what happened. The second person hears the same words but remains calm. They assess the situation, decide whether it deserves their attention, and move on if it doesn't. Which person has more power? Most people focus on the visible action. They see the argument, the comeback, the dramatic response. But real power exists beneath the surface. It exists in the ability to choose your response rather than surrendering to your impulses. This is one reason silence can be so powerful. Silence communicates that your emotional state is not available for public manipulation. It sends a message that your peace cannot be disrupted by every opinion, criticism, or provocation that crosses your path. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates confidence. People who constantly seek the last word are often trying to convince others of their value. They feel an internal pressure to prove they are right, intelligent, worthy, or superior. But when you truly know your worth, that pressure begins to disappear. You no longer feel obligated to attend every argument you are invited to. You no longer feel responsible for correcting every misunderstanding. You no longer feel compelled to defend yourself against every accusation. Because your confidence comes from within, not from the approval of the crowd. There is also a profound difference between emotional regulation and emotional suppression. Many people confuse the two. Suppression means pretending you don't feel anything. It means burying emotions and denying their existence. Regulation means acknowledging your emotions without allowing them to control your behavior. You can feel anger and still remain composed. You can feel hurt and still choose dignity. You can feel frustration and still decide that silence is the wiser response. This ability creates a presence that others can feel. Have you ever met someone who remains calm in situations where everyone else loses control? There is something undeniably powerful about them. Their calmness creates stability. Their restraint commands respect. Their silence often speaks louder than another person's shouting. This is because people instinctively recognize self-mastery. Deep down, we understand that controlling ourselves is far more difficult than controlling a conversation. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Power is not found in how many battles you can win. Power is found in how many unnecessary battles you no longer feel the need to fight. The moment you stop seeking validation through reaction, you begin developing something far more valuable than influence over others. You develop influence over yourself, and that is the foundation of every lasting form of strength. One of the deepest sources of human suffering is not what people say about us, but what we fear they might believe about us when we are not there to defend ourselves. The fear of being misunderstood sits quietly beneath many of our reactions, shaping how we speak, how we explain ourselves, and how desperately we try to control our image in the minds of others. Most people do not realize how much of their emotional energy is spent not on living their truth, but on managing how that truth is perceived. At its core, this fear comes from identity. We all carry an internal story about who we are: kind, honest, intelligent, loyal, misunderstood, strong, weak, Ambitious. We build this identity over years, sometimes unconsciously, through experiences, relationships, and the way others respond to us. And once that identity becomes important to us, anything that threatens it feels like a personal attack. So when someone misunderstands us, it doesn't feel neutral. It feels dangerous. It feels like something essential is being taken away. This is why people rush to explain themselves. They are not just trying to correct information. They are trying to protect identity. They are trying to preserve how they see themselves and how they want to be seen. But the uncomfortable truth is this: no matter how clearly you speak, you cannot fully control how others interpret you. Every person listens through their own filters. Their past experiences, emotional wounds, biases, and expectations all shape how they interpret your words. Even the most honest explanation passes through layers of personal distortion. This means that misunderstanding is not an exception in human communication. It is the default condition. Yet most people behave as if misunderstanding is a problem that must be fixed immediately. They over-explain. They justify. They clarify again and again, hoping that eventually the other person will get it. But in many cases, the other person has already decided what they believe. They are not listening to understand. They are listening to respond, to judge, or to reinforce a pre-existing narrative. This is where emotional exhaustion begins. Because trying to correct someone who is not open to understanding is not communication anymore. It becomes emotional labor. It becomes a silent negotiation for acceptance that may never come. And yet, people continue because the idea of being misunderstood feels unbearable. Silence, in this context, feels like surrender. It feels like allowing a false version of yourself to exist without resistance. But this is where a deeper maturity begins to form. There is a point in emotional development where you realize that being misunderstood is not always a problem to solve. Sometimes it is a reality to accept. Not every mind is meant to understand you. Not every person is capable of seeing you clearly, and not every misunderstanding needs your correction. When you begin to accept this, something shifts internally. The urgency to defend your image starts to fade. You stop reacting to every false assumption. You stop entering every conversation where your worth is on trial. You stop living as if your identity is fragile and constantly under threat. This does not mean you stop caring about truth. It means you stop sacrificing your peace for people who are not genuinely interested in it. There is a quiet strength in allowing people to misunderstand you without losing yourself in the process. It is the understanding that your identity is not built in the minds of others, but in your own actions, values, and consistency over time. Eventually, you realize something powerful. Those who are meant to understand you will understand you without force. And those who are determined to misunderstand you will not be changed by explanation. At that point, silence stops feeling like weakness. It starts feeling like clarity. As we come to the end of this conversation, there is a simple truth worth carrying with you. Not every situation requires your voice. Not every opinion requires your correction. Not every misunderstanding requires your explanation. Life will constantly place you in moments where your ego wants to react, defend, and prove itself. It will feel urgent. It will feel necessary. It will feel like silence means losing. But with time and awareness, you begin to see something different. You begin to notice that most of the battles you felt forced to fight were never truly about your dignity. They were about your need to be validated in real time. They were about the discomfort of being misread. They were about the fear of being reduced to something you are not. And yet, every time you chose to step back instead of stepping in, you didn't lose yourself. You protected yourself, because every unnecessary response costs something. It costs your attention. It costs your emotional energy. It costs your inner calm. And often, it costs far more than the situation itself ever justified. There is a quiet wisdom in learning that you do not have to respond to everything that disturbs you. You do not have to correct every wrong opinion. You do not have to enter every argument that invites your participation. Some things resolve with time. Some things resolve with distance. And some things were never meant to be resolved through words at all. The more you grow, the more you realize that peace is not found in being understood by everyone. It is found in no longer needing everyone to understand you. And in that realization, something powerful happens. You stop performing. You stop over-explaining. You stop reacting out of emotional impulse. And you begin to move differently in the world. Calmer, clearer, more grounded, not because life becomes easier, but because you become less available to chaos. So when life tests you, when people misinterpret you, when situations try to pull you into emotional reaction, remember this. Your silence is not emptiness. It is control. It is not avoidance. It is awareness. And it is often the clearest sign that you no longer belong to every noise around you. You belong to yourself, and that is where real power begins. Thank you for being here. Until next time, protect your peace and choose your responses wisely. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response.